Now you and we're both here for the same reason. We're here to learn how to pull an engine in a 350Z. Now before we get any further in this video, this is gonna be quick, straight to the point, the best how-to video on YouTube. But I want you guys right now to click the thumbs up on the video, hit the subscribe button on my channel, and if this video doesn't help you remove the engine in your 350Z, I want you to unsubscribe and unlike the video. You know what? Dislike the video, because I can promise you at the end of this video, both you and I will both have the engines out of our 350Zs. My name is Daniel Keller. Let's go build something cool. Slap a nice cover on the roof so that we can set things on the roof without scratching it. This is a drift car, so I don't care. This is more for you guys. Next, we're gonna start by taking off the hood. So there is 4 12mm nuts, 2 on each hinge. Usually I have somebody to help me, but we're gonna try to one-man army this one. Oh, now it's stuck on the prop. There we go. Now look at all this room for activities. Now you guys might be a little bit intimidated by this job at first, thinking, oh my gosh, there's so many bolts and nuts. How am I gonna remember where all of these go? Tip number 1, use Ziploc bags and label it with a Sharpie what component you took those bolts or nuts off of. Tip number 2, for something even just as simple as the hood, take your nuts and put them right back where you got them from. That way they can never go missing. And you'll know exactly what they're for. Next step is we're gonna remove the battery. We're just gonna pop this cover off. Then before we even disconnect terminals, there is a whole bunch of body clips holding on the wiper cowl. So we're gonna take those off. We're gonna peel this weather strip off. Now this first part of the battery trim comes off on its own. Then this wiper cowl will come off. Now we have full access to the battery. Now you guys probably won't have this ghetto of a battery setup. This dude is literally using some type of metal strap for like hanging stuff. And he's got a screw to tighten up the negative cable on the battery. Disconnect your negative cable. And if the guy who owned the car before you is a hack job, take the screw out that they use to keep tension on the negative cable. And disconnect everything else on the battery. Now you guys aren't gonna have this massive orange wire on here. This is for running an amp for subwoofers or aftermarket speakers. Previous owner had this in here. You guys will not have this wire. We are going to get both of these wires connecting to the positive terminal removed, because you're gonna need to take it off later anyways. That is something else. I mean, hey, if it works, it works. Now since we're already here looking at the wire harness, this is the main wire harness for the engine. Now you gotta pull this wire harness all the way from this grommet where it connects to the ECU inside the car and pull it all up this way. Really hard with a big pry tool, so I'm gonna try a tiny screwdriver. See if it makes this easier, which it does. Use a tiny screwdriver, go in from the top, pry in. Now on the back of this piece, there's 2 push clips. So like you just push those in, push this forward, and now the whole thing lifts up and she's loose. I'm gonna disconnect this washer hose, twist it first to avoid breaking it. Now that the engine harness is loose right here, we're gonna work on pulling this from the inside of the car. Now hopping in the passenger side of the car, you're gonna want to remove a couple of trim pieces to get at this. First piece is gonna be this trim piece on the bottom here. You literally just grab it and pull up and it will pop. Next, we're gonna move this trim piece right here. Unscrew that little guy back there, literally with your fingers. It comes off super easy. And then grab this panel and pop it off. Don't be scared, you're not gonna break it. All there is 2 metal locking tabs like that on the back side. Now taking a peek underneath here, you guys can see the entire harness that comes down from the battery. A huge identifying piece is that sub wire that the guy's running for the amp, which we're also gonna be removing. But for starters, the connectors that you guys need to remove are that white connector right there, this big black connector that connects to the ECU, and the other white connector right there on the left side. You can push this tab forward, pull down with your fingers, and this whole locking tab will come down. That easy. Now on the white one, you can literally just slide it straight up and it will come off of it. Then squeeze the top tab and unplug it. Now you guys are probably gonna struggle with this white one right here the most. So I'm gonna show you guys how to get that one off. There's no push tab that you need to push in to release it. You literally just shove a screwdriver on there, just twist until it releases,
pull this all the way over, and then pull the white piece down. And now our entire harness is disconnected. Now we're gonna try and pull it out the top. Also, just a quick word of advice for you guys. If you ever need to get power and ground for any aftermarket electrical systems that you're installing, please just do not tee into ECU wires. Get an add-a-fuse and go to a fuse box. This is ridiculous and dumb. So we're gonna pull this whole mess of wires that this guy installed out with the harness. Now to pull this harness out of the top, you can't just grab it and yank it up. This grommet is gonna feel impossible to get off from the top. And that's because there's locking tabs on the bottom of it. Nobody on God's green earth is gonna be strong enough to get their hands underneath there and push the locking tabs up and just simply lift the harness up. That does not work, trust me. I was just as frustrated as you guys are trying to get this off when I did it. You could use a flathead screwdriver and shove your arm up there, but I got this pick up there and then just push to release the tabs. You disengage them from the bottom and then it knocks the whole harness loose. And now that it's loose, I can pull the whole thing up, and I'm just gonna push this sub wire back through the grommet, and then I'll pull it out towards the back of the car eventually. And before you lift this harness up, there's a second harness that's attached to it that goes underneath here, and there's just 3 connectors that you need to disconnect right here. Push the locking tabs with a flathead screwdriver and pull them. And then 1 body clip to disconnect with a zip tie on there. You're probably gonna break it. And I broke it, but it doesn't really matter because it's just gonna sit there anyways. Try and pull 1 connector out of the hole at a time. Do the 2 white ones first. And just like that, the whole harness is out. You are gonna have to fold the black tab down when pulling this connector out or else it won't fit. And here's all the garbage wiring that he's got teed into an ECU harness for some reason, which we're gonna get rid of. Now we're just gonna shove that down there and pretend that it does not exist. Next harness we're gonna pull, which goes back to why we disconnected this from the battery to begin with. This little positive post here, literally just pull this grommet up. Get your small screwdriver, lift that up, and now this is part of the engine too, and it's all gonna come out together. While we're also here, I believe this is the vacuum booster hose for the brakes. We're gonna disconnect that, give it a twist, she's loose, and pull it off like nothing. Next, just to get this out of the way, you guys might not have it, but I'm gonna pull the sway bar, just a bunch of 14 mil bolts. Since we're already in this area, we're gonna disconnect the purge valve line, hose clamp, give it a twist, should come right off. Tuck this to the side of the car because this end is not gonna come out with the engine. Then this fuel line right here goes straight to what looks like a fuel pulse damper or pressure regulator, and it's got a 2-bolt flange. Do not try to take this off with a pair of pliers. This hose is a part of that whole assembly. You're not gonna get it off. So you gotta unbolt that 2-bolt flange and you might leak a little bit of fuel. Now this line is also gonna stay with the car, so I just grab a rag, tuck it over here, set it on the rag. That way you won't leak fuel all over. And just like before, put your bolts back where you got them. And if you want, you can put a plug on that fuel port so you don't leak fuel out when you're pulling the engine. Next, you guys might have the stock intake. This car has an InGen cold air intake, but stock, you probably have these 2 bolts up front here. Looks like there's another mount right here. There might be a couple things you need to pull off to get the stock air box off. You're gonna wanna get the stock air box off, disconnect your MAP sensor, and then just pull your intake piping. In my case, it's gonna be super easy. So I'm literally gonna have 1 hose clamp, 1 mount with a nut, and then I can pull it off. Then there's also a PCV hose on the bottom side of the intake, which just has 1 hose clamp on it, and then you can pull it off. Now, even just with that slight amount of work that we just did, you can tell there's a lot more room on the sides of the engine, which is gonna give us access to the 2 heater core lines that we need to disconnect. But for now, just to give us more access to things, our next step is gonna be starting to pull the front end off this thing. And with pulling the front end off this thing comes with draining fluids, which means we gotta get the front end of the car jacked up so we can get under there and drain the coolant and drain the oil. Wait a minute, there might not be oil in this car. There's kind of a hole in the block. I'm actually interested to see what comes out of there. Maybe there's metal shavings or big chunks or something. The whole goal behind my tutorial here versus everybody else's is everybody else tells you to disconnect the power steering lines, drain your power steering fluid, disconnect the air conditioning, drain all the refrigerant out of it, which 90% of you guys are not gonna have the equipment to drain AC refrigerant properly. And I'm here to tell you guys, you don't need to drain it.
Keep watching the video and you'll see how.
Now, I really wish that this car was bone stock so I could show you guys fully how to remove the front bumper, but I can tell you guys there's a whole bunch of body clips along the top you're gonna have to take off. Then there is gonna be clips along the side you're gonna have to detach. There might be some bolts you gotta take out from the side. There's gonna be clips along the bottom holding the fender liner on and some splash tray trim underneath. But this car got thrashed pretty hard and it was essentially a street drift car. So it does not have anything holding the front bumper on, and I can literally pull it off with my hands. And this car's got a whole drift bash bar set up on the front, so it's gonna be a little bit different than yours from factory, but the mounting locations are still the same. There's just a bunch of 14 mil bolts mounting it right to the chassis of the car on each side. So we're gonna whip those off so we can get this drift bash bar off, and then I'm gonna have to probably cut the wires or pull the wires for these little lights on the front here. I also just realized that this whole plastic rad support on this car is busted, which kind of sucks, but it's a drift car, so as long as it's decently secure, I'll probably just zip tie it together. Or we'll try and find one for cheap somewhere. First thing we're gonna drain is coolant. There is a little drain valve on the bottom of the rad. It's just a Phillips 3. Crack that guy loose and it will start coming out. And it's gonna come out super slow like that. All you gotta do is take the rad cap off and she will start flowing. There we go, rad cap's off and it is flowing fast. This is by far the easiest way to drain the coolant without making a mess. While this is draining, I'm just gonna take some pliers and pull the clamp off of the rad hose, move it back. Yeah, this plastic support's definitely a little broken. That slowed down quite a bit. I'm gonna pull this lower rad hose and hopefully we don't make a mess. I'm gonna take it off real slow. It is off. Next, we're gonna disconnect this upper rad hose. Then there's two 10 mils on the back for the rad fans, two connectors that connect the rad fans, and we can lift the rad fan shroud out. Now, if you're pulling the whole front end off this thing, it's not really necessary to pull the shroud, but it gives me a lot more visibility, so I'm gonna do it. I'm also gonna pull this engine cover. Give myself some extra room. Oh, the rad fans are broken too, in that same corner. I'd say that's missing a piece. Now to pull the rad, you're literally two twist tabs away. This one's broken on this side. This thing must have had some type of collision on this front corner because I'm finding a lot of damage here. But we're just gonna twist this locking tab here until it lines up. You can lift that off. And then now, since we already have the rad hoses disconnected, we can almost pull the rad. There's one thing in the way, and it's the overflow, which looks like it's literally 110 mil. And I was right, it is. Now we should be able to pull this rad out. Oh, nope, you can't. The AC condenser is bolted to the rad. That's dumb. Unless we can lean it back enough to get these 10 mils off. Now that the rad is unbolted from the AC condenser, the AC condenser sets down into the rad. You just gotta pop the two little mounts off on the bottom, which are right down there. You can just shove a little pry bar in there, lift it up, and it will pop that out of the rad. And now we should be able to lift the rad out. Now the reason I want to pull the rad separate from the AC condenser is because I don't want to disconnect the AC condenser. Ooh, this rad got hit a little bit too. Just to take a quick peek at this fan shroud and the rad, this whole bottom corner is busted off of my fan shroud, but aside from the two rad fan connectors right on the fans, there is the main harness connector right on this bottom corner. I didn't catch what I was lifting out because it was already busted, so it came off like nothing, but you are gonna have to unplug this underneath. Then this rad, you can definitely see right here, she got hit, but it's not leaking or anything, so I might just take a 2x4 and straighten that out and slap her back in. Because this is a budget drift car, boys, and it's gonna get smashed anyways. Let's get back to pulling the engine. The next step that I wanna do is pull the front end off this thing, so we have a lot more room pulling it out. The reason I pulled the rad And I can kind of show you guys from here, there is no connections to the AC condenser on this side, only on that side. So we're gonna try and lay the whole thing over that way when we pull the motor out. That way we don't have to disconnect any of the AC lines. So now we're gonna pull the headlights, and then we're gonna work on getting this whole front end pulled. So up top on the headlights, it looks like there's just one 10 mil up here. Then we got two 10 mils underneath. And then right next to that one underneath, there is one from the side that bolts down the quarter panel right here. And then you're also gonna have the bolts for your bumper brackets right there, but mine's kind of busted off. And you can pull this bumper bracket off as well, just to make taking the headlight off a little bit easier if you want. But I think you can clear it either way. Holy, did this guy ever mangle this wiring? Oh my gosh. We are gonna have some figuring out to do here. Half the wires are rubbed through. We're gonna have to build our whole new harness for this headlight. Good news is the factory side of the connector looks okay, which means we can get a connector and this is fixable. I will say this headlight connector is pretty tough to get off. I've been struggling with this for a minute. There we go. And it is full of corrosion, so this whole harness needs to be fixed. And there's literally a loose bulb in this headlight. I don't know how I'm gonna get that out. This is also a prime example of what you see when you buy modified cars. This connector doesn't even exist. It was completely hardwired to the headlight, so I had to cut it out to remove it. I'm gonna try and find a factory connector and rewire in a factory connector so it's plug and play. Now the next thing on the front end that we're gonna get pulled off is the hood latch, which is just a couple of 12 mils. Nice and easy. Now as for all of the wiring that's here, you're gonna need to disconnect all of this and just lay it to the side to pull the front rad support off. Airbag connector, they're kind of finicky to get off. I advise just whipping these two 10 mils off. Now the airbag sensor is gonna be loose, just leave it connected. Put this bracket back on and put your nuts back on so you don't lose them. Then when you go to reinstall these, make sure you put blue Loctite on the nuts. Everything else, we are going to disconnect the connectors. So your ambient temperature sensor. So the nice part about having the rad out too is you can squeeze all these body clips and then just pull them out by hand on the other side. Makes it a lot easier. Now one part that sucks about this power steering cooler that I'm realizing now is that you have to disconnect the lines because these are just too bendy and you're not gonna squeeze them out of this little tiny hole in the rad support. You just can't get away from it. But at least we got the whole wiring harness disconnected. Don't need to touch that anymore. But we are gonna have to pull the washer fluid tank because normally it is bolted to the front rad support, but mine is all busted up so I can see the bolts there. That bolt broke. And this whole thing just came off because absolutely nothing is connected. I'm gonna take a picture of these washer fluid lines so I don't have to test them and have a 50-50 chance of getting it right. There's red tape on one, yellow tape on the other. Also, just so you guys know, literally all of these connectors are gonna be so hard to take off that are anywhere on the front end or in like the fender area because there's just so much dirt and water and grime that gets in this area that the connectors get stiff. Just be patient with them. Take them off slow so you don't break anything. Needle nose pliers are your best friend. So there's two washer pumps, one for the front, one for the rear, and then I think there's a level sensor here on the bottom. And I'm gonna disconnect the lines and the washer fluid will start leaking out of the lines once I pull them off. And I can pull the harness off of here. Now I got one last clip holding this whole thing on. And also there's one bolt up top here holding the filler neck on, but mine was literally just missing. But there is enough space that you can just drop the whole thing out the bottom. Now I'm gonna take this and let it drain out over here so we can keep working. 10 mil for the power steering cooler line. And this guy's got a zip tie here, squeezing this clamp. I think the best option is gonna be to take this right off so that way you can move the lines in and out and get those hose clamps off easier. Now there's also two 10 mils holding on the power steering cooler on the bottom. Definitely gonna leak a little bit of power steering fluid, but It is what it is. So if you guys take a peek in from the back here, that's where the power steering lines go through the rad support. There's 2 hose clamps right there. I think that's gonna be the easiest spot to disconnect this and make the least amount of a mess. But it's definitely still gonna leak. Took the hose clamps off, and I pulled it through, and I'm gonna try and twist them out like this. Sometimes the best way to do this is to just shove a flathead screwdriver in and just go around in a circle and just separate the hose. These lines are on there, man. I'm gonna grab a cap for this so I don't get oil everywhere. There we go. That one's leaking even more. Wipe up our little mess we just made. Now this front end should come off, no problem. I'm gonna leave the top bolts for last, whip off these 10 mils. Now there's 4 12 mils up top. Oh, there's a whole cross bracket that holds the whole thing. That's what these bolts thread into. So we're gonna pull the whole rad support off and pull this, and I'm gonna put the bolts back in here so I know where it goes. Just like that. Hell yeah, boys, that's progress. Now you guys can see what I meant by the condenser is gonna be completely loose. It's gonna bend the AC lines a little bit, but we're gonna do it at the end. For now, we're gonna leave it sit as is. Now I can get at the whole front of the motor. Next piece that we're gonna take off is also on the passenger side of the car. There is a ground right here. There's 2 10 mils. That ground connects to a harness that goes to the engine. If you look on the engine here, you can see 2 connections where the grounds connect to the engine. This 10 mil right up top here. Then this 12 mil on the timing cover on the front. Now that's completely disconnected. You don't even need to take the 2 grounds off the frame here. Way easier that way. One of the last things that we're gonna disconnect up top before we completely go underneath the car is the 2 heater hoses. Now there's one on each side. There's one on the left side right there. You can just pop that hose clamp off, twist that hose around, we're gonna get that one taken off. Then there's another one on the right side of the engine, which is right there. Same deal. These ones are gonna be super tough to twist off. But pop the hose clamp, use your pliers, give them a twist. If you need to, use some silicone spray, use a pick. Separate the hose from the hard pipe. This shouldn't be too bad. Using a vice grip on the hose clamp can definitely help once you get the hose loosened up. And then you kind of just yank it up. That was extremely successful. You guys are probably gonna have a really hard time with it. One thing that really helps a lot is if you get a set of pliers like this where you can squeeze the hose and kind of rotate. And of course, to loosen the hose up, I used a long 90-degree pick to get in there and just loosen it up off of the hard pipe. And I'm just gonna take the coolant hose, tuck it in where the ECU was. That way it stays out of the way. We're not gonna be fighting with it when we're pulling the engine. I even have to use the pick on this side. Starting underneath the car, we're gonna drain the oil. It's a 14 mil, no oil on the fingers. Oh, there is oil in it. I don't see any shavings coming out yet. When we pulled the dipstick, there was no oil in this thing at all.
Now, if we look in the oil, it actually doesn't look like there's very many metal shavings in there.
This wire harness that goes on the bottom of the transmission here, it goes to both your downstream O2 sensors, a little sensor on the bottom of the transmission here, one at the starter. This is all connected to the main harness. So all of this needs to get taken off and it's gonna come out with the engine. And disconnecting these, I found that a flat blade screwdriver is your best friend working on Nissans. And anything underneath here that has a clip on it or a bracket, I am gonna choose to take the bolt off for the bracket so that I'm not breaking more plastic clips. Conveniently, the bracket for the starter wire is one of the bell housing bolts. There's 2 10 mil bolts up on the side of the transmission right here mounting the bracket that brings this whole harness down. Both of those were very easy to get at. Now it looks like the last wire we have is one that runs all the way to the back. All right, boys, this is by far the worst part of this job. The harness that comes in on the passenger side underneath the car wraps all the way around. You can see this harness comes around the backside. There's 3 10 mils that mount it on the backside of the transmission. And then it comes around this piece up to there. There's a connector up here on the driver's side of the transmission near the back of it by the cross pipe. I
unbolted this transmission mount, like cross brace, a little bit. Just unthreaded it so I can get a finger above the mount now almost. Just to lower the transmission a bit and get some more room. And I had to use these pliers to reach up there and squeeze the connector and then pry it away to disconnect it. But I got it disconnected. It sits right up there. Super, super hard to see. You can't even really see it on camera, but you get the idea. So we look at the back side of the transmission here. You guys can see where that harness kind of comes from the driver's side over here, over to the passenger side. You can see the 10 mils that I threaded back into place. There's your drive shaft. So if we go ahead and try to pull this harness out, it should come out now. There we go, the whole harness is down. And that's all gonna come out with the engine. That's dumb. They should have had a bulkhead harness that you could unplug the whole transmission one. Now that we got the harness fully disconnected, the next thing that we're gonna jump to is the bell housing bolts and the clutch slave cylinder. Then as for this clutch slave cylinder, what we're gonna do is take the two 12 mils off this cover that's holding it on. And then I believe those two 12 mils are also bolting the slave to the transmission. Don't take off the clutch line bolt because you're just gonna lose a whole bunch of brake fluid. Leave that on. We're just gonna set the slave cylinder to the side. And then we are going to attempt to take off the exhaust bolts. Let's hope these either break and come off easy or they just come off easy. All right, I whipped out my phone just to show you guys the bell housing bolts because it's a lot easier. You got a 14 mil right there, 17 mil, another 17 mil. Then if we hop up top up here, another 17 mil there on the left. Then we got a 14 mil that bolts towards the back right there above the subframe. And then there's another one on the other side as well. Then on the passenger side, we got a 14 mil on the bottom. Then the next 14 mil is the starter bolt. Then if you keep going up, you can see there's another 17 mil up there. And then up higher, there is two other 17 mils, but you can't really see because of this breather. You can see where the breather tube hole is right there. We got all the exhaust bolts off. There's only one stud on the inside. The other two are bolts. You can see it up there. Got them off on both sides and only one broke. I took off that clutch slave cylinder and those two bolts are the two that hold it on. You don't actually need to take this off. I wanted to take it off just to see what type of throw bearing it is. And as you guys can see by me doing this, when the slave cylinder pushes this, it pushes it that way, which pivots on that fork right there and pushes the throw bearing against the clutch, which means this is a push style throw bearing, which means you do not have to disengage anything on it. We can just pull the engine right out of here, which is awesome. And the entire pressure plate and everything will stay on the flywheel. You guys just saw a couple clips on my phone just so I could show you because the camera is way too hard to get in there. We're at the point where we got everything off underneath. Now we just got to disconnect the engine mounts, which if you guys look at this front control arm right here, the engine mount nuts are hidden right in behind there. You can see them up there. You're just gonna need an extension and possibly a swivel. And they look like 17 mil nuts. So there's gonna be one on each side, one right in here, and then one right in here on this side. So let's grab the impact, get those taken out, and then we have everything disconnected underneath that we need to. Now that we got both motor mounts out, our next step is gonna be the power steering pump and AC compressor. Our first step is gonna be obviously to take off the belts before we can remove the power steering pump or AC compressor. So we're gonna crack this 14 mil bolt loose on the tensioner pulley, but don't take it all the way off. Then there is a 12 mil adjuster on the bottom. We're gonna loosen that off. And while I do that, you can see the pulley drop and the belt come loose. And you don't gotta loosen it much, and she will come off. Then same idea on the AC compressor tensioner. Crack it loose and loosen the adjuster. Now we're gonna start with the power steering pump. As you can see, you can spin this pulley freely with your fingers now. Make sure if you're gonna spin this pulley though, that you got your lines plugged off on the side here or else you will shoot fluid out of those lines. We're just gonna take a 12 mil on an impact and buzz all of the bolts off that are holding it on. And a 14 mil for the other two. Now I don't think you gotta take this inside guy out. I think that bracket will stay. And we can wiggle the pump off. Sometimes a light pry bar helps, free things up.
And there we go. Literally 2 bolts and the power steering pump is loose. And we can just tuck it over to the side like this when we pull the engine. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I disconnected off camera. There is a connector on the power steering pump. Gotta disconnect that as well. Now let's move on to the AC compressor. There is a couple more brackets going on with the AC compressor, but you don't have to take any of the bracket bolts off. All you're gonna do is take out the bolts on the side of the compressor, which you guys can see right there. There's a 14 mil. Then there's 2 more 14 mils on the bottom of the compressor. The AC compressor is loose with the whole condenser assembly. And just to make lifting this condenser out of the way easier, since this compressor is all soft lines, we can grab this whole thing and lift it out of the way along with the condenser. So you do not have to discharge the AC in these cars at all if you don't want to. And I find the best way to set this is just set the AC compressor into the fender well right there, and then you got the condenser just sitting up top. So now at this point, boys, we literally have everything off of this car that we need to pull this engine. We got the engine crane all hooked up. I got the chains hooked up. I'll show you exactly where I went. On the front here, right above where the power steering pump was, there is a big M8 bolt right there. I don't like bolting engine cranes down with anything less than an M8 bolt. Then I just realized I actually forgot something. There's a ground strap right there on the passenger side. Take that 10 mil off. That is definitely an engine ground to the head. Then at the back here, it's gonna be really, really hard to see because of the coolant pipe, but you guys can see there is a bracket right there. I bolted the engine crane chain to that using the bolt that used to be right here. And then I can adjust this to level it out, so I'm not worried about it being unlevel.
Hopefully this video has helped you guys out so far. Let's pull an engine. What? Are you kidding me? Bro, a rod just fell out of the engine as I jacked that up. This thing is mangled.
I wonder what else is gonna fall out of this thing. Now before we go ahead and yank this engine out, you guys, I got it jacked up a little bit on the crane. I actually missed 2 bolts. So if you take a peek, right in there, there is actually another bell housing bolt on this little inspection cover. This is on the driver's side of the car. There's a bolt that goes from the engine to the transmission right there. If you look just past the driver's side motor mount, you will see it. And it's pretty easy to get at once you have the engine jacked up a little bit with the engine crane.
So there is 12 bell housing bolts total. There's 8 of them that go from the transmission to the engine, and then there's 4 of them that go from the engine to the transmission. I'll go show you where the 4th one is.
This one is definitely going to be harder to see, but it is by where the starter sits. You can see it right up above where the starter sits. It goes from the engine to the transmission, so it faces the rear of the car. Now I'm going to hop underneath the car and get those pulled out, and then this thing should be ready to come out. Fast forward like 10 minutes, I took the starter out. The only thing I actually missed showing you guys on camera to take the starter out, those 2 bell housing bolts go straight through, thread into the starter, but all there is one little 13 mil bolt holding the wire harness to the starter. I already showed you guys to disconnect this connector on that transmission harness. You can get in there right by the right front inner tie rod between the subframe. You can kind of see the hole where the starter was up there. Very, very easy to get at. And you can see our engine and transmission is already separated a little bit just from taking those bolts out. Then on the other side, same deal. Right where that crank sensor is, or flywheel sensor, I just stuck the ratchet up here and I was able to get at it. Now, to pry the engine to separate it from the transmission, there's a little spot on the engine right here that's got a little bit of an ear sticking out. So I grabbed this little snap-on pry bar here, shoved it up underneath the frame right there, stuck it in that little hole right there, and then just pried a little bit. And if you have all the bolts out, it should separate very, very easily. Sometimes the dowel pins get stuck, but luckily for us, it separated very easy. You can see there's already a nice gap between the 2 of them. Another thing that I do want to mention that I forgot to talk about as we remove them is that make sure that you guys keep track of where each bell housing bolt went on the transmission or from the engine to the transmission. It is pretty self-explanatory. You got your 2 long 14 mils that bolt into the starter. You got 4 17 mil heads that are all the same length, and these ones all go around the top of the transmission to the engine. Then you got your 1 17 mil bolt that bolts from the engine engine to the transmission right above the starter. Then you got your two lower 14 mils that are smaller, and they go from the engine to the transmission right above that little subframe piece. Then you got your inspection plate, which this bolt here goes with the inspection plate from the engine to the transmission. And then you only got two bolts left, and one of them is a short 17 mil, the other one is a short 14 mil. They're completely different thread pitches. They can only go in their own respective holes.
Now, considering if I don't bring a transmission jack down here, that transmission is just gonna slam down onto that subframe bar right there. I'm gonna bring a floor jack in here and just put it on the transmission just to give it a little bit of support while we're yanking the motor.
We got the floor jack set up, ready to go. We should be able to pull this engine. I'm excited. Let's hope everything is disconnected. I got it separated underneath. Whoa! Are we good? Are we floating yet? I'm scared right now. Hopefully I didn't forget anything. Whoa! That just released. All I did was jack it. Whoa! That was definitely it. Let's go. Did we forget anything? Is it first try Friday? Put the whole engine harness on there. It's looking like first try Friday, baby! Woo-hoo-hoo! Hell yeah! Let's go! Oh, I feel like I'm gonna die doing that. We finally did it. That came out so easy. Absolutely nothing got hung up. The only thing that we missed was those two bell housing bolts, and I took the wire off the starter, which if I didn't, it would have just been dangling and putting a lot of stress on the wires. So that's why I took it off. But other than that, disconnecting everything on the transmission was huge. We set that all on top of the engine and absolutely nothing got caught. I am so hyped. We finally have the engine out of the 350Z, and we can finally start transferring parts over and resealing our used engine that we have over in the corner over there. Then we can get it back in the car and get this thing running again. Only downside I'm seeing so far here is that this does look like a stock clutch. So we might have to upgrade that.
If you guys enjoyed this video or it helped you out, make sure that you guys go hit the subscribe button. Really helps me out. And if you like it, YouTube tends to push the algorithm a little bit more. So I appreciate that as well. I make a lot of how-to videos and car build videos on my channel. And I'm finally branching into the rear-wheel drive drift car world. So that's why we got the 350Z. And now we're doing a full build series on it, building my first ever drift car. But I'm not gonna make this any longer than it already is. Peace out, you guys. I'll catch you in the next video. Go build something cool.